The Spinoff Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold! Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
There's a big sigh. Did you get that sigh at the start? Can we keep that in? That's the problem is we've exhausted all our energy. Yeah. And honestly, listeners, if you could have a window into the sealed section of the Gone By Lunchtime podcast, you would really have fun. There's a lot of libel in there, a lot of malicious gossip, a lot of... What else was there, Ben?
Some informed speculation. Some prognostication.
Wow. Kia ora tātou, this is Gone By Lunchtime. That was Ben Thomas. I'm Toby Manhire, and that there is Annabelle Lee. How are you, Annabelle?
Very well.
How are you, Ben?
I'm great.
We are a little bit late, a week late. We were going to podcast last week, but then something always happens, doesn't it?
It was my fault.
Was it your fault?
Yeah.
But if we had our podcast last week, we were all going to come in and predict that Jeremy Corbyn would surge to within a few percentage points of Theresa May's Conservative Party. That was what we were going to predict, and that the youth vote would be more
Honest to God.
That's what we were...
That's what I had written in a sealed envelope that I had sent to myself and date stamped.
Again, the pundits were all confounded, and we all know nothing. We're going to talk a bit about the UK election, maybe a bit about the immigration policy from Labour. What else? We haven't even spoken since the budget, which seems like
a million years ago.
A million pies ago.
So we'll probably get there. The UK election. Did you watch it closely, Ben?
No, I kind of kept in touch with it. Lots of people sent me clippings of Theresa May interviews, which were my main lifeline into it.
Right. The memes, the May memes, the May
not even the memes.
Just...
The direct primary material I thought couldn't really be improved on. As she kind of trundled from interview to interview, being asked, which Harry Potter character she was like, and she'd say, I'm not really like any of the characters, but I think they're a terrific read for adults and children. And this kind of, I think the Tories kind of took the traditional small target strategy for a campaign and turned it into a kind of blank canvas. There's just totally empty slate, a kind of space where there should be a candidate.
Yeah, well, the strategy was, I guess, that the lead is so big and the opposition is so hapless that what we need to do is the closest possible thing to nothing at all, and they decided not to even front for debates, and that went quite badly in the end. Did you keep an eye on it, Annabelle?
I didn't really keep an eye on it, only what people were sort of posting about it on Facebook and so on, but it seems like she has really snatched defeat from the jaws of victory in the most embarrassing and arrogant way.
But it does show, I guess, we ended up with a hung parliament, of course, so the Tories still came first, and weirdly enough increased the percentage of the vote, but not by as much as Labour did. And we got this hung parliament and this rather appalling
or a strong
spectre
opposition, depending on how you look at it.
Of a deal with the DUP and imminent collapse in the Good Friday Agreement. But we won't get into that. But it does show, maybe, if nothing else, that things can change in an election campaign. So when we look ahead to our own election. What are we now? 13th of June as we speak, 23rd of September. So that's, by my calculations, 2 months and 10 days. Things can shift. You know, things aren't locked in the way that we've become used to a sort of, campaign inertia almost in terms of polls.
This happened in the United States election, happened over Brexit, and it's happened now in Great Britain. We've seen that campaigns have actually had much more of a tangible effect. It's become sort of common wisdom, and I've always gone by the rule of thumb that you can basically predict an election result by looking at the polls about a year out. Same time of year, so it's September, it's a bit gloomy, people aren't sort of, in love with the government, and you'll usually be about right, and that's been the case for most previous New Zealand elections. But I think what those campaigns had in common was that there was a bit of a vacuum at their core. I've talked about Theresa May being a cipher. Hillary Clinton as well basically didn't campaign or was not seen to campaign on a positive vision or indeed any kind of vision. She just attacked Donald Trump. And that was the same kind of thing that May did with Corbyn. So I'm not sure that we have exactly the same conditions for that in New Zealand. But what I also thought was an interesting lesson is that, no matter, because the Corbyn surge was seen as a kind of corrective to the kind of right-wing conservative populist surge in America, this idea that if the left adopted some of the same sort of, setting a vision kind of tactics, that people would fall in behind. And we saw a huge increase in the youth vote, 72%, I think, of 18 to 24
No, it's not quite right, but anyway,
right.
It's an increase, yeah.
And, but at the end of it, they still are likely to end up with a more conservative, more reactionary government because of the DUP, the unionists. And so I think what this shows us is that nothing can go right in the current hellscape that we live in. And we're ultimately doomed.
Do we think, though, that it's that things shifted during the campaign, or is it that the media are just not in touch with what's actually happening on the ground?
I think probably it's a bit of both, isn't it? I mean, I think that, the media in the UK from every side of the spectrum, and it does span quite a way there, of course, clearly weren't quite in touch with what was going on, maybe in the same way that they, in the States, they weren't really in touch with what was going on. Or, to put it another way, it shows that now, this in itself has become a bit of a cliche, but you can now bypass those traditional organs of mainstream media and get your message across without them. So, there was some interesting data that's come through in terms of the way the Corbyn campaign worked, that the most shared pieces were positive Corbyn pieces, but most of the pieces, and this goes across all parts of the media, including the liberal left branches, were the vast proportion were anti-Corbyn, but that didn't matter because if people weren't sharing them, then it doesn't matter anymore if you've got a vicious, if it ever did, if you've got a vicious denunciation of Jeremy Corbyn on the front page of the Mail or the Sun. It matters which story human beings are sharing with one another.
Yeah, and for this is part of the reason that I think politicians and PR people and really close media watchers, people who spend all their day on Twitter, can actually be much more disconnected than the general public are, in the sense that there is this kind of long tail in internet-based stories, newspapers in particular, where certain stories will get the vast bulk of readership, and then some will be in sort of double or single figures, and basically just sort of published into the void. And when you're sort of keeping a close eye on sort of media monitoring, all of these things flash past your retina at the same, at the same speed, and you don't really see the weighting with which they're actually getting, read and taken up by the public.
In terms of the New Zealand context, I don't know if there is a lot of take-home for us in this election. I think the circumstances are pretty different. Theresa May appears to be like quite a flaky leader. I don't think that English has the same level of arrogance as her. And in terms of Andrew Little, Corbyn had a party that was ankle tapping him, whereas I think you could almost argue that Little is the one that often ankle taps his own party and confuses messages. A recent example being Calvin Davis and the prison issue. I think what's interesting is that perhaps less time should be spent in terms of Labour fighting over the middle ground and looking further to the left for votes. And perhaps the biggest lesson is for the media, which is that, we don't know all we think we know.
Certainly there is an argument that what it shows and what other elections in Europe and the States have shown is that people are looking for someone who says something, So whether it's the centre or the left or even a kind of version of social conservatism, people want to hear someone who speaks human words and presents a vision rather than kind of dancing carefully in the way that certainly Hillary Clinton did. And I mean, could you argue that Bill English even needs to think about a campaign that sets out a clearer vision than National Party campaigns have been in the past? Do you reckon, Ben, if you were advising that? Because they have already started using the strong and stable slogan a couple of times.
Yeah,
and it's
that's right.
Possible. I made that joke, but it is possible that they had said that is what they were planning to use, and it may be that it's not really, people aren't so interested in facile slogans at the moment.
Yeah, Frank Luntz, who's an American political consultant, he's the guy who came up with the phrase.
Cephalologist.
Yes. He's the guy who came up with, using the words energy exploration for oil drilling, so he's a kind of master spin doctor. I was reading one of his books from 2005 where he said that, actually the main demographic in America even then was fed ups. And he said that people were fed up about different things, but everyone's fed up. Young people are fed up with being told what to do, with not enough jobs being available. Old people are fed up with society changing around them. I think that's right. I think that John Key kind of coasted to success on the cusp of something special, which literally nobody even within the Beehive had any idea what he was referring to. And that's not really an option here. In this election, and I think we saw that with the budget, that there was at least this kind of semblance of, a clear direction and particular issues kind of being hammered.
We'll come back to the budget in a bit, but let's go first to something of this week, which is the Labour immigration policy, which was announced after a lot of rhetoric and a lot of lead-up, including the Chinese-sounding names thing, which made it difficult, certainly, which Labour people will privately acknowledge was a fuck-up of some degree, at least presentationally. Can Labour, Annabelle, can Labour lead the debate that they say is needed on immigration in New Zealand, or have they lost the sort of moral authority to do that?
Well, someone needs to lead it, and I think good on them for at least putting some kind of plan out there. There's been a lot of talk, immigration has sort of dominated the political conversation over the last sort of 2 years, but not many people are willing to actually put a proposal out there to be discussed. And of course, Labour's done that, and Twitter is going apeshit. But I think there's value in what they're proposing, and that a serious discussion needs to be had around it. The problem is, as you said, is that when they did the Chinese-sounding names, it definitely, their credibility on this issue took a hit. But I think that the media needs to be mature as well, and to stop harping on about that particular issue, and perhaps look at what's being proposed and analyse it.
What do you make of it, Ben? The sort of headlines on it are to bring back immigration by 20 to 30,000, I think, and their focus is on the sort of lower tier tertiary education immigration, which is mostly temporary, but has historically in some ways provided a kind of pathway which some would call a backdoor to gaining New Zealand residency.
Yeah, the policy that Labour has come out with doesn't seem outrageous on the face of it. Early on in my working life, I worked at one of those private training establishments. Ben Thomas, Professor of Law.
So what did it involve? Did you sort of play a VHS tape and chew gum?
I think there was some sort of probably some rudimentary PowerPoint slides that I threw together the night before. And the class would be sort of a quarter full. Most people would be at the casino.
Yeah.
It all sounds horribly stereotypical and cliched, but so I mean, a lot of these.
If there are any Ben Thomas students out there, we'd love to hear from you. We're happy to get you lawyered up.
Yeah, if you'd like to call from the large law firm that you now work at as a result of your sterling grounding in New Zealand constitutional law.
That's right. I hope Ben, that you were able to convey your deep and profound respect, love, and admiration for Sir Geoffrey Palmer in these classes. Every time we put up a piece by Sir Geoffrey Palmer on the Spinoff website,
that old
Spin blog, Ben Thomas comes in with some vicious zinger. It's hard work.
You know what's interesting about the immigration debate is I had a quick look on Twitter on in the Uber on my way here, and people are up in arms about the potential loss of 30,000 what do they call them, low value students. We currently have 90,000 New Zealand youth not in employment or training. No one seems to care, but suddenly we're deeply concerned with the rights of these students.
I mean, there's that, and then the other part of the argument, which Bill English has been articulating sort of preemptively, he said that it would stall the economy to do that. And there is a sense in which the economy or the growth cycle within the economy depends on immigration across the board to enable, in the most kind of the quotidian examples that we get, to enable an Indian restaurant or a Middle Eastern restaurant to bring in chefs,
I mean, there's 2 points I'd like to make on that. First of all, we can't take the breather that Andrew Little wants until there's at least one better place to get sweet and sour pork near my work. Two, we need to plan for the future, right? This is New Zealand Inc.
Yeah.
And New Zealand Inc. can't work on an empty stomach.
We can work on a crowdfunding campaign if required.
Secondly, it was interesting. Labour put out this list of what they called supposedly skilled work, and Bill English caught a bit of flack for defending supermarket shelf stackers. Saying actually, well, if they don't stack food, there won't be any food on the supermarket shelves. And of course, he's completely right. When we talk about New Zealanders out of work, there is work that a lot of New Zealanders don't want to do, and this kind of falls on deaf ears in Parliament, where most new MPs seem to have been professional political advisors for much of their working life, and yet still seem dumbfounded that we need 3,000 overseas people to go and be tour guides, sort of wandering around the South Island and driving buses and taking people on ghost tours of Central Auckland, even though it's work that they probably would never contemplate doing themselves.
But is it that people genuinely don't want to work and they genuinely can't find people to do these jobs? Or is it more a case that the wages being offered are so poor that why would people take those jobs? And so actually that immigration is more damaging for our economy because it allows businesses and employers to keep wages low because they know that although somebody might not do it for a certain amount, they can always offer it to a new immigrant who often come from really impoverished countries that will happily do it cheap as chips. And is that really good for our economy? And I think is it 800 million that we could potentially lose? It's actually it's a drop in the pool of that particular, what would you call it, pool of money. And a lot of these private tertiary education providers, whatever you call them, PTEs, unlike the one you worked at, Ben, the very high quality one, a lot of them are not. So is that really what we want our economy to be built on? I don't know.
Yeah, look, I think the export education thing is quite an easy win for Labour on this. Going back to their lead up to it, I think this is quite an important point in terms of the politics, because the two areas where this has impact on New Zealanders is one in the economic effects. Perhaps the effects on the creaking infrastructure, as Andrew Little would have it, but it also has an effect on the experience of New Zealanders who live here, right? And when you crank up the immigration debate, tempers flare. People suddenly start thinking that it's a bit more legitimate and okay to kind of fly their racist flag high, And Labour can say and are saying, well, obviously we're not anti-immigration. Actually, if you read the words of the policy, you'll see that this isn't race-based. But of course, this is the oldest trick in the book. It's the easiest trick in the book, and that's why it's always a go-to for flailing parties like Labour. So, there is, and although they can say, well, look, this is actually a reasonable policy, and I think it is. It's completely within the bounds of proper debate on immigration policy. You can't just ignore their behaviour in the lead up to it, which has been inflammatory and incendiary. It's kind of like, turning up for a boxing match or something, poking your opponent in the eye before it starts and going, oh, sorry, I'm trying to delete it. But now let's have a fair fight. You
Except
can't just erase history like
not
that.
to strain the metaphor, a passage of time has gone past them, they've served their suspension, maybe red card, blah, blah. Maybe they get a fresh start now. I mean, it is difficult,
It's
isn't
like
it?
Gareth Morgan and the Cats. Like every time he tries to launch a new policy, we're back with, the media again harps on about, the cat.
If you're suggesting his solution to the cat issue is something that should be adopted for migration and dealing with population surges in Auckland, then I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop you there.
What would be nice is to actually have Māori included in the immigration debate, considering that, the Treaty of Waitangi is our original immigration policy. It would be nice to have some cross-party discussions amongst the Māori MPs around a tangata whenua perspective on immigration.
And is there any sign of any of that?
Well, interestingly, Shane Todima was on our program a couple of weeks ago. And
the Hui, TV3,
on the Hui,
Sunday
TV3,
mornings.
9:30 Sunday mornings, repeated at 10:30 on 3+1. He said that he would like to see immigration levels reduced.
Otherwise, he's a bit hopeless, isn't he?
I wouldn't say he was hopeless. He was.
I only saw him on The Nation. He was a bit
Yeah.
hopeless on The Nation.
No, he was. He probably had about 80% possession of the ball in that interview, I would say.
Did he?
But although Marama and Penny didn't have as much airtime as him, I think they perhaps made their points in their points in a stronger way.
He's definitely an enthusiastic candidate. He's a pretty good performer. I was a bit surprised when he sort of compared his deselection as a Labour candidate to the Foreshore and Seabed Act in terms of throwing Māori under the bus, but...
Let's move on to something that we can really bring us together as a nation, which is the knighting of John Key.
Feel good stuff.
Who
can we add a national anthem and post edit?
Yes.
We could sing it. And in fact, one of the things you missed before the podcast began was a sort of radio jingle by Annabelle. What was it? About
On 98 FM.
Could we have that? Just for John Key. Could you do that for John Key? Sing the radio jingle.
It would be my pleasure and my honour. Love songs till midnight. 98 FM. This one's going out to you, Sir John.
That's beautiful. Wipe your eyes. And John Key, who's not that into being called Sir John, and changed all of his social media handles within approximately 5 seconds of the announcement being made public. I don't know, there was a bit of a kind of storm immediately that it was sort of outrageous. Is it outrageous? It's sort of really fine, isn't it? I mean, he was the Prime Minister. Yes, he brought back the honours, the knighthoods, but it's kind of what happens, isn't it? Do you guys think that? Or am I viewers? Too complicit?
I am less offended by Sir John Key being knighted than I am by people who have received these awards simply for being business folk that have made lots of money for themselves. So I think he's more deserving than some of the other people that received Queen's birthday honours.
Except it was on his bucket list.
Oh, look, yeah, absolutely. I think what people objected to, what his critics objected to, was his clear and obvious delight. Just his sheer exuberant, boyish happiness.
Can I
at
say,
receiving the award,
though, I much prefer that you be openly joyful,
Right.
then remember
Try and play it cool.
when Clark got rid of the knighthoods, and then they were, National brought them back, and they were offered retrospectively to the people that had received the other gongs.
Yeah.
And all of them that accepted were like, look, I really don't want to, but my wife really wants me to have it. Or my family, like, I could take or leave it, but my family really want me to have it. No, just be honest. You want it, that's cool. Like, but don't pretend that it's being thrust upon you against your will.
It's like when they brought back Queen's Counsel, there had been a few rounds of appointments of special counsel under the Clark government. And I think, when you check the Law Society's website, people had updated to the new title within about an hour.
You can read, if you want to read Ben Thomas's long argument with a Green candidate on the subject of those QCs, you can look at twitter.com. But we're not going to get into that now.
Did anyone see Emma Espina's tweet on Twitter about Helen Clark?
Where she just came in from nowhere.
So awesome. Yeah, there was some guy on Twitter musing about, would Helen Clark have accepted this?
Yeah.
And Emma Espina came back and said, actually, Helen got, did away with knighthood. So I doubt even if it was offered to her that she'd accept. And then out of the blue, like the heavens opened, the clouds parted, and Auntie Helen came down from the mountaintop.
One word.
One word.
Correct.
She's everywhere.
It was golden.
She sees everything we do.
And for more on the knighthoods, you can listen to the Real Pod, who got into this before we did last week. Did you record that, Jose? No, he's shaking his head. He looks like he'd rather be anywhere but here right now. He really does.
Can I just say
He'd rather be reading the coffee news in his dope hat.
Can I just say one thing about those before we move on?
Yes.
And that is that I really want to acknowledge the stance of people like Apirana Mahuika and Dr. Ranginui Walker, both of whom were offered knighthoods and both of whom turned them down because they felt they were an expression of colonialism, and that their first loyalty would always be to te iwi Māori, and that as Māori men they were born with their own mana. I think that it's a very admirable position to take, in my opinion.
What will you do when they contact you asking you if you would like to become a dame?
If they ask me if I want to be a dame, I'll say instead of being a dame, can I be a lady? Because I think Lady Annabelle has a really nice ring to it, whereas Dame Annabelle,
that is going to require new
not
legislation,
so
probably, but it's worth it.
Well, because so it's not Lady Brona, it's Brona Lady Key, because she's a spouse. It's not her own honour. So because he's Sir John, she's Brona Lady Key.
she's just Lady Brona.
Isn't she Lady Key?
She's Brona, Lady Key, and then
she's just Lady Key. She's just Lady. You don't get a comma. Is
it a comma or is it a hyphen?
You get a knighthood and you get a comma. I mean, there aren't punctuations involved. This is bullshit.
So she'd only be Lady Brona if she was.
Yes. That was a joke that was being made in the Real Pod.
If she was like a baron, this is not a.
If you want jokes about Lady Bronas, you can go to the Real Pod. That's the kind of level of conversation.
What I'm leading up to here is the great injustice ignored by many. That Max gets nothing out of this. There's no hereditary titles.
This is turning into the Real Pod now.
So unfair.
The Real Pod's quite good. Let's talk about the budget. Does feel like a long time ago, and it went. They seemed to go pretty well for the governing National Party. Stephen Joyce
it was
managed to avoid any banana skins, and I mean, people, I think justifiably, people say that you shouldn't kind of leap into discussing the politics of it before discussing the substance of it. And the substance of it was what, Ben? There weren't tax cuts. There were shifting of the brackets to adjust for how inflation has crept. Right? That was
there was bracket. Yeah, there was shifting of the brackets to address what they call bracket creep, where because wages increase by inflation and pay rises.
And that should just be embedded in the tax law, shouldn't it?
I think that's Act policy. I think that you regularly update it.
There you go. And I think basic common sense again. The Association of Consumers and Taxpayers.
So that happens periodically. What that means also is that everyone gets the same pay rise at a certain, or the same tax cut. I shouldn't say pay rise because this is one of my chief beefs with governments over the last sort of 10 years, is that they characterise this as sort of giving families and workers something rather than just not taking more than they need. And I think it's caused this sort of weird kind of effect on the electorate whereby we look to the government to improve our standard of living and our take-home pay. And they sort of, every few years, they'll give us $10 a week or $20 a week and smile satisfied like a good bloke boss who's just brought you 30 cans of double brown at the end of the week or something.
30?
Well, for the whole country.
I see.
It's but this and the other thing that happened was a lot more allowances and benefits to sort of equalise after-tax pay. So big rises in the accommodation supplement, increases in a lot of working for families payments. Yeah. So it turns out the only problem with working for families and communism by stealth that John Key had was that it was too stealthy.
David Seymour said that it was a. What did he say? He said it was a. Did he say costly? Oh no, he said it was a.
Wearing his hammer and sickle
budget or whatever. But then he also said that it was the kind of budget that Michael Cullen could have delivered, and that was probably closer to the truth.
Well, it was big increases in the sorts of benefits, disguised as tax credits,
right?
Working for families, that sort of thing that Labor used instead of tax cuts across the board. It didn't change tax rates in terms of the percentages. So yeah, I think that's good. And there was a lot more social spending. I mean, what really happened is that Joyce looked at all of the weaknesses that the government had and just sort of threw money at them. So housing was a weakness. So he decided to spend more money on the accommodation supplement so that people would feel that they had more money for rent. Now, ultimately, of course, that'll go straight into landlords' pockets. But at the time, people feel like they're going to be getting a boost. They get these stories around $80
it manages to keep landlords happy as well. That's
because
right. Because the current government have resisted increases to the accommodation supplement, and there have been, in part, it seemed because of, I think, MSD research that suggested that precisely
it gets passed on. Yeah,
and that. I don't know, Annabelle, I don't know what you make of all that, but it does seem as though if that happens by itself without some other changes to people, for people who rent, such as a warrant of fitness, such as other guarantees, it seems to sort of lack any meat, really. What do you reckon?
Yeah, well, in the absence of like a think big kind of housing scheme, just giving people a bit of extra money for their accommodation supplement seems to be a very a deficit approach to dealing with the problem of housing. As someone who doesn't know their times tables, I don't really feel like I should comment too much about the budget. It's sort of like getting medical advice from the people who are promoting vaxxed.
Right.
But certainly it seems like a band-aid approach and arguably a tax bonus for landlords.
It does, though, for those of us who aren't necessarily especially gifted in the mathematics department, it does offer an opportunity to just do kind of endless, to the point of tedium, epithet-type gags where you call, the Band-Aid budget or the Stockholm Syndrome budget or whatever. This one never... It's been a long time since one has actually stuck.
Yeah, no, that's right. I remember the Colby budget. That was pretty uninspiring. Cheese. Yeah, that was when the tax cuts were the same as 2 blocks of cheese. Okay. This was, remember the halcyon days, you would have been in the UK eating all of our export quality cheese. and the greatest problem facing New Zealand was the increasing cost of dairy at supermarkets.
Yeah, that was
it seems a long time ago.
Yeah.
It did seem pretty unfair,
stuff like
right?
that and the brain drain and
brain drain.
those
Westpac
kind
Stadium.
of problems. Yeah. That's so cool.
But the politics of it did snooker the Labour and Green opposition.
It just smothered them.
And they just were scrambling to try and work it. They tried the dollar bill budget, didn't they? That was their first.
Didn't they only get like an hour beforehand to prep before they go into the house? It's pretty tough.
It is tough. And so you've got to obviously they've always sort of scripted half of the response already.
And this became
to make
clear.
it fit.
Andrew Little was scrolling past sort of whole sections on his iPad as he did his speech and reply and couldn't make the full 10 minutes or to a half an hour. Sorry, I think
20 minutes. Yeah.
And part of that was because he obviously had pre-scripted lines on mental health funding, and then the government threw $200 million at mental health funding. And it looked a bit sort of ad hoc.
Yeah.
When you sort of looked at it, it was kind of for $100 million for innovative solutions for mental health issues.
And yet Team New Zealand got more than what youth suicide did.
In the budget?
Is it $2 million over $2 million for 4 years, or versus what New Zealand got for Team New Zealand got to run their America's Cup campaign?
Well, I think the government's thrown a lot more into it this year, but there is a question about how well it's going to be used. It was tagged for sort of innovative solutions, which I think is code for well-meaning hard case mavericks to tour high school, giving inspirational Dawson's Creek style speeches. Rather than the sort of methods which are shown to work, which is what we're doing now, but more of it.
I mean, there is mental health is a really interesting area because I think there is a genuine possibility it becomes an election issue, and obviously these things tend to have more traction when a kind of human story attaches itself to the broader policy debate. But more and more with mental health, my perception is that it's something that people in families or wherever talk about. It's no longer a kind of something that you kind of don't really talk about down at the supermarket or the pub or the cafe or whatever. And so increasingly its visibility and its currency as a political issue is important, and clearly there's an incredible strain on the system, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, funding has increased under this government, but the demand, I think, has gone up by 60% in 8 years. Look, I'm centre right. I'm a big fan of late capitalism, but you can't really argue that there hasn't been this massive externality in terms of the kind of mental health strain on a population basis. When I was a kid, there was no sort of hint of the same sort of levels of depression, anxiety in the community at large, and a lot of that's to do with the way we live now, and the government has to step up because there isn't any way that people can solve that externality themselves.
I don't know, Annabelle, do we want to start talking about social investment and all that sort of stuff? And she doesn't look, her face is telling me quite clearly no. Can you guys just explain to me because I don't really have any grip on it, what's going on with Ngapuhi? Is it ever going to be resolved? I mean,
my understanding is that it was fairly close to being resolved until the latest manoeuvring. So I was kind of surprised to see it come back up again, because my understanding is that both Tūhoro Nuku and Te Kotahitanga had been working away on Maranga Mai. Maranga Mai had been accepted, and then there was a few ratifications that seemed to be ticking along, and then this happened. I understand Finlayson is disappointed. He's been working really hard on this for a long time. There's been some sort of mischief making around the way it's been reported. Is you can't deal with 100 hapus and divvy out a settlement to all these various hapus because you have to have a critical mass, so on and so forth. But that's not actually what this was about. This was about negotiating their terms for a settlement rather than receiving their settlement money separately. So yeah, it's kind of hard to understand and disappointing, but this is one of the most important iwi settlements of our time. The majority of Māori, whakapapa te Ngapuhi. It has the potential to do incredible good in some of the most highly deprived communities in the country, and it's just a real shame to see it stumble again.
So yeah, Ngapuhi is the biggest iwi in the country, about 110,000 people, just about 100 hapu. It's massive, historically not hugely cohesive. Would that be fair?
Yeah, but, if the government can negotiate multilateral, trade deals all across the planet, I don't see why you can't, deal with these hapu and...
So in the past, John Key said there's probably around $200 million on the table for a Ngapuhi settlement, which would obviously be a huge kickstart for economic growth in the north. It would mean jobs, it would mean development, it would mean cultural revival. Where there seems to be a sticking point is Te Horonuku, which was a group set up to progress the treaty negotiations and led by a guy called Sonny Toe, who's a very pugnacious, driven guy who perhaps does not have the best relationships with some of the other groups in Ngapuhi. So he drove that process through to getting a mandate to kind of, convincing enough Ngapuhi that there should be, some kind of progress on settlements. There was a group called Te Kotahitanga who didn't necessarily agree, and there's been a real sticking point, and right now it seems to be
there was also a treaty claim in the middle of it all, urgent treaty claim, which found that the mandate wasn't strong, and that really they should go back to the drawing board and figure out a way for the two groups to come together. Yeah. And a lot of work had been done on that with positive results too, I understand.
Yeah, and huge numbers of people sort of flowing in to try and get the two groups working together. James Bolger, former Prime Minister, Tuku Morgan, current president of the Māori Party before he took that role, and there has been this incremental progress, and I think everyone was feeling quite positive about it. And it seems to have founded, from everyone I've talked to, it seems to have founded on personalities. And
it's a couple of individuals holding the iwi.
Finlayson publicly,
ransom,
I think, said that it was Sonny Toe needed to get out of the way before this could progress any further. My grand and naive hope for the next parliamentary term is that the MP for Northland, the Right Honourable Winston Peters, can play a role in getting that sort of moving. He's not Ngapuhi himself, he's Ngāti Wai, but he's pretty keyed in to that kind of area. It's about time for him to leave a legacy that's something other than sort of calling Muslims vipers.
Do you think
I imagine
seriously?
Though that his opinion of this will be largely informed by Shane Jones, and Shane Jones is appears to be a Te Horonuku advocate, so I'm not sure if we'll see peace break out across the north anytime soon.
Well, that's all very helpful. Thank you very much. We'll let you go, Ben. You've got to catch your flight to Wellington, don't you? You can see the excitement.
I'd hate to miss that
across your face. Thank you very much, Ben Thomas from Exceltium. Thank you very much, Annabelle Lee from the Hui. Thank you very much to Life Direct, our sponsors. You can click on their thingamy-doodle on the side of any politics page and see what the best life insurance deal you can get is. We'll be back hopefully sooner than the last one, right? Should we try and do another one in a fortnight or something? Would that be good?
Yeah.
Didn't we say that last time?
Did we say that last time? Should we, for the end of the podcast, just sort of get our diaries out and knuckle out some times?
Yeah.
Would that be a good bit of content?
Wednesday's always good for me.
Wednesdays are good for you? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, let's leave it there.
Okay. Could you do another jingle, Annabelle? Jingle us out?
Love songs till midnight on 98 FM with your host, Gail Ludlow.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government. A podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spinoff or wherever you get your podcasts.
Talofa lava. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spinoff. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spinoff member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.